tea, Vicar?
Yes, please.
Did I ever tell you about the occasion on which, to my utter amazement, I saw what I can only explain as a ghost, a very traditional, very normal ghost? It began like this. A long time ago, when I was a young teacher, I worked at Gamlingay Village College in Cambridgeshire, and the village colleges were run by a warden who was in charge of both adult education and the school education, a deputy head who really ran the school, and a further education tutor who was responsible for the adult education and the youth work, the youth clubs and so on. I was working as the further education tutor, and my pal Bill Farrow was the head of the science department. Brilliant scientist, and you wouldn't find a better colleague anywhere. He was a colleague and a friend, and we had that sort of close relationship where Bill was the honorary uncle to my kids and I was the honorary uncle to his, and it was as if we really were brothers. And I was moved away, I got promoted, took other jobs. It wasn't for a long, long time afterwards that I heard from Bill again. He would then have been over 70. And he phoned me and said, "Would you be able to come over to Cambridge to see me?" He said, "I've retired now." And he said, "I've just been told that I've got 6 weeks to live." And I said, "Bill, the minute I can get away, I'll be over to see you. Of course I will." And for the next 6 weeks, I went over to Cambridge from Cardiff here every weekend and spent as much time as I could with him. And the terminal illness that was destroying him made him so weak and so ill that it was heartbreaking to see a grand old friend in that condition. Then I got a phone call from his village priest, Father Ian, who said he was very sorry to tell me that Bill had passed over, and that one of the last things he had asked was for Ian to call me to go over to Cambridge to conduct his funeral. And I said to Ian, "Yes, of course I will. I'd have done anything for Bill." And he said, "Well, I've arranged it for the following Friday. Could you get over Thursday night and we can run through the service together and decide which parts each of us will do?" And I said, "Yes, of course, Ian." So I finished a day's work in Cardiff, drove over to Cambridge, got there. I'd warned Ian it would be late, got there about midnight. And there we were in Ian's study in the rectory, and going through, if you could imagine, two priests with prayer books open at the funeral pages. "Well, if I read this prayer, will you do that reading? And then I'll read the next prayer." And we were just planning how we were going to share the service. And I saw Bill. He looked as he had looked when we were young teachers together. He looked radiantly happy, healthy, no trace of the illness. But he looked as real and solid as Ian. It was just as if he was there in the flesh once again, but many years younger. And he gave me a great big smile. He'd always had a mischievous sense of humour, and said, "Tell Ian that Lady Juliana was absolutely right." And then he vanished. And I thought, whatever is Ian going to think if I tell him, because he had seen and heard nothing, if I tell him that I have just seen Bill's spirit, that he looked radiantly happy and healthy and young again, and he wanted me to tell him, Ian, that Lady Juliana was absolutely right. I thought, he'll think I'm coming off the wall. And then I thought, no, damn it, if this had been the other way round, Bill would have done this for me without a second's hesitation. So I drew a deep breath and I said, "Ian, I'm sorry that this sounds strange, but I have just seen Bill. He looked wonderful, young, strong, healthy, radiating happiness, and he asked me to tell you that Lady Juliana was absolutely right. I thought Ian was just going to shrug his shoulders and say, "I'm sorry, old chap, doesn't mean anything." He didn't. He nearly fell off his chair, gasped for breath, and it took him 2 or 3 minutes to speak. And then he said, "You can't have known that." And then he explained. He had been with Bill in intensive care a matter of minutes before Bill passed over. And he said, "The last thing I told Bill was the story of Lady Juliana, Saint Juliana of Norwich, who had had a vision of heaven. And the other nuns had clustered round her because they thought she was going to fall. Her eyes had gone blank as though her spirit had left her body. And she recovered and said, 'No, my sisters, I'm not ill. I have seen heaven.' And of course the first question that anyone would ask, what is it like? And Lady Juliana said, in an ecstasy of happiness, 'All shall be well, and all shall be well, and all manner of things shall be well.' And Ian said, that was the last thing that I told Bill before he slipped away. He said, 'You've just driven 300 miles to tell me that you've seen him, that he looked radiantly happy and healthy again in his absolute prime, and that he wants me to know that Juliana was right. He's in heaven, and it is a place of wonderful, indescribable happiness.' Well, if you can imagine 2 priests sitting together, going through a funeral book and looking at each other as if they were just qualifying for Madame Tussauds. And finally, Ian decided, got up, walked to his wine cabinet and said, 'Before we do any more, Father, I think we need half a bottle of this each.' And so we did, and we conducted the funeral the following morning.